Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced by North Idaho College located on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
14 months ago, we had a guest on this program that we were so excited about what she had done in authoring a book, and some new developments have taken place that we've invited her back to be with us again this week and also next week. I welcome to the program Patty Dickinson, who is the author of a book titled Hollywood, the Hard Way, A Cowboy's Journey. And I have a copy of the book with me here. In addition to the book, there is now out on the audio tape the story again. And for our viewers who were not with us over a year ago when we did this interview, let me describe for you the content as far as the theme is concerned. This is in 1946 when an Oklahoma cattle rancher made a bet with a Hollywood movie star that the rancher's grandson could ride a horse from Guthrie, Oklahoma to Hollywood and do it in at least 50 days or under 50 days. It is a fascinating story. One reason why we invite our guest back. In addition to that, she has a wonderful story to tell about the fact that it's now being made into a movie, and very few books wind up in movies. With that background, Patty, welcome back. It's great to have you here this week and next week. And congratulations to you on both the book and the movie.
Thank you so much. It's been a busy year, a challenging year, a fun year since I've been here, and I'm glad to be able to share it again.
Thank you for being so generous to do that with our wonderful viewers. And I welcome our regular panelist, Janelle Burke, an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her, Steve Schenck, who is Vice President of College Relations and Development at North Idaho College, and Janelle will commence today's questioning.
Patty, your book and your story in the book is just a fascinating one, and it's an extraordinary experience that this young man had. Can you tell us a little bit more about that story?
Well, number one, it is a true story. It is a true story about a man who in 1946, to honor a bet that his grandfather made, and his grandfather was Rolla Goodnight, quite a famous family in Southwest history. He rode his horse over 1,500 miles, one horse, one man, to get from Oklahoma to Hollywood, to win a bet that essentially he didn't even know what it was. His grandfather told him, "The bet is not important, son. What's important is that you prove that cowboying is still a legitimate way, an honorable way of life." And so he had to be there in order to win the bet. He had to get there in 50 days. Well, he made it on the 49th day. And when I heard this story, it so captivated me, I could not believe that the story hadn't been told. Well, I was lucky. It had not. And the fact that it's a true story makes it just all that much better. The gentleman is now almost 75 years old, and he lives over in Kalispell, Montana.
So you've interviewed him, you've talked to him, and you know the story from him firsthand.
Yes, I taped, after I heard about the story, I drove over to his home in Kalispell over a period of a year, as many times as I could get over there. I know at least 10 or 12, and taped interviews with him. And that's the basis of the story.
And then from there you did some research by following the trail yourself.
I've been over every inch of that trail. I did it in a car, air-conditioned car, and I did it a lot quicker than he did. I did part of it last year on my book tour. I did half of it, and then I've since done the other half.
Steve Schenck.
Patty, first of all, congratulations on the success of your book and on the forthcoming movie.
Thank you.
I've got to back up a little bit. Unfortunately, I didn't get to participate in that first show that was done with you.
Yes.
And maybe you wouldn't mind covering some old ground for us.
Not at all.
Seems appropriate based on our topic today. There's kind of an interesting story behind how you heard about this tale. Could you tell us that?
Yes, it is an interesting story. I would say it is a serendipitous event. I was on my way to a writers' conference over there in the Kalispell area, and I stopped in this roadside bar for lunch. I don't make it a habit to go into bars like this. The bar had bars over the window with a sign that says, "This is Bud Country." And it was kind of a scary place, but I was hungry, and the motel where I was staying, the owner said, no, they have very good food. Just go right on in. So I went into this bar, and the bartender, a woman, Julie Woody is her name, and she said, what are you doing in a place like this? And I said, well, I'm going to a writers' conference nearby. And she said, are you a writer? And I said, yes. And she pulls out a chair at my table and sits down and says, boy, do I have a story you should write. And she told me just a snippet, maybe 50 words of this story. And it totally captivated me. I knew right then that I had to find out if indeed he did what she said he did. And the way she had heard about it is her father and the gentleman I wrote about attend the same church. And so she had heard just a bit. And so she told me just a bit. And I was, first of all, curious, did he actually do that? Or did this somehow get embellished? So I did set out to find out just exactly. And when I did finally talk to him, which was a year later, it took me a year to get my first interview with him. And after waiting a whole year, I asked him, did you really ride a horse from Guthrie, Oklahoma to Hollywood, California? Now, mind you, I waited a year and called him 25 times during this year. And his answer was, yep.
So you knew then you had your work cut out for you.
Right then I knew this was going to be a challenge.
You give me the perfect lead-in for my next question, because I was going to ask you about your writing background. Obviously, you had written before if you were going to a writers' conference.
Right.
Could you tell our audience just a little bit about what you had done leading up to this book?
Well, I actually did not start writing until I moved to Idaho in 1993. So I had written the rough draft of a novel at this point. And Hollywood the Hard Way is so far my first published book. I have written 2 other novels, but I started out to be a novelist. That was my goal. And then stopped in this bar, had this incredible story dropped in my lap, and thankfully had the awareness to see its potential. I viewed it, in a different context as something historical, a slice of Americana. And I walked out of that bar that day determined to write that story.
Thank you.
It is a true story, but with your great gift of writing, it is such a fascinating story. It also could serve for those who like novels.
Oh, it is.
It's that kind of wonderful story. Before we get into some more issues in the book, you and I have talked on a number of occasions about your background. I should tell the audience that you hold a BA in history from California State University at Fresno. And while there, you also became a community volunteer. And would you share a little bit of that experience? Because I believe that influenced your life in a way that in this case led to your work, such as a book, because a wealth of information that you got from your years' experience meeting people from around the world, learning a lot about different kinds of people and characters.
I did. I was very fortunate. At Cal State Fresno, I was the community advisor to the university lecture series. When distinguished lecturers came to our university to speak, I was the one who was assigned to put on the reception for them. It was a fundraiser reception, and the funds from the reception were used for scholarships. But in the course of doing this, I had to find out what their likes and dislikes were. I ended up, ferrying Benazir Bhutto, Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, around Fresno for 2 days. I found out she drove a pink Jeep Cherokee. We drove in my red Jeep Cherokee. She wanted to drive my car, and I said, sure, go right ahead. But what I did was I arranged the reception for all of these dignitaries. Carl Sagan, one of the most fascinating evenings I ever spent was with former Prime Minister Edward Heath of England, who knew everybody, all the leaders of World War II. He called them by their first name. I mean, I'm just in awe. He was probably the most fascinating man I've ever met. Authors, statesmen, politicians.
President Ford, President Carter.
Right. Elie Wiesel, the Jewish author who chronicled his experiences in the the death camps and how he lost his family. I had dinner with him.
So all of these people affected your life in a way that must have contributed to your thinking about why don't we record some of the kinds of information that you get from such exciting lives, which wound up in this book with someone who's not famous, but yet had a fascinating story.
Well, you know, what it gave me, what my experience with all these people gave me was kind of a global view of our own country. I mean, these were, many of them, people from outside our country, and they were all fascinated with the West. I am born in Oklahoma, of a family probably very much like Jerry Van Meter came from. And I am part Cherokee Indian. 3 out of 4 of my grandparents were Indian. And what I think my experience with these people did was to give me sort of a global view, and it made me appreciate our own history. And this is such a vital part of history, and what oral history stands for. And this, indeed, and stories like this are stories that were passed down through oral history.
And that tied into your major also, since you're a history major.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much, Janelle Berg.
The story is a fascinating one, and it's one about cowboys and experiences. And can you take us back to that time and tell us a little bit about what was going on in the U.S. at that time?
In 1946, at the time of this book, the war was just over. The war had just ended. World War II had just ended. Part of our troops were home, but the majority of them were still overseas. Half of the citizens of Oklahoma were still engaged in farming. It was more of a rural society. The big urban shift was yet to come. The gentleman in the story, the 3 major men in the story, walked around with 6 guns. They thought nothing of it. They wouldn't get dressed in the morning without putting on their 6 guns. It was the kind of life then where you went to town on Saturdays and bought groceries for the whole week. You know, you had ice boxes and you didn't have refrigerators. You cooked on wood stoves. Half the time, you know, Jerry would ride wherever he was going to the nearest little town. He would ride by horseback. So it was a time of innocence compared to now. It's a different world, and that's also chronicled in the book. That's part of, I think, what's led to its appeal is the innocence of the times as well as the innocence of the young man himself.
Steve Sheen.
Patty, as somebody who spent a good part of his working life writing, it's always been one of my major responsibilities. I know how hard that work is. I've also worked with some authors like you who tried to write novels, publish them. It's a dream, I think, of everyone who writes,
yes.
And a dream very few people realize. Now, it wasn't easy for you. Would you tell the audience a little bit about the difficulty you had getting a great book published?
That is an understatement. This book was turned down 19 times by New York publishers. It wasn't commercial enough. It is, I was told, I will say I felt good about it from the standpoint that they said it's a very well-written story, but we don't have a niche for this. This is a 19th century story that takes place in 1946. We don't know what to do with it. It doesn't have sex, drugs, or rock and roll. That was a comment I got. But I was almost ready to self-publish. And then I submitted it without an agent. This is all done but without an agent. And this took place over 18 months. I almost declared the post office as a dependent because I sent out the manuscript so many times. The things that, one of the New York publishers said that this period of history doesn't count yet. I thought that was interesting. As a history major, I found that interesting. When the editor at Nebraska Press read it, he said, this period of history is just coming into its own, and you are ahead of the time. And I thought, wow. I like what he said, of course, but, and then he turned out to be very right. Look at Tom Brokaw's book and all of the stories about the World War II heroes. But I have enough rejections to paper, not just a wall, but my entire bathroom. I haven't yet to do it, but it is true. And you have to believe in the story. Not so much, I guess they say you have to believe in yourself, and that's true too. But this story, I always felt would have been a sin if it hadn't been told. It's part of our history. It's something unique and so representative of the great American cowboy.
Well, and perseverance is an underrated quality that contributes to success. Tell me, you mentioned comments you got in the form of rejection letters. Once you got the book published, did you get much feedback from reviewers, from readers, from I think it's Jerry Van Meter is the principal character himself. What kind of feedback did you get on those who finally got to read your book?
I cannot believe, as hard as it was to publish, is the exact opposite of that has been true in the reception of it. It's Publishers Weekly gave it a glowing review. I couldn't have written a better review. Library Journal, there has been book list. It was chosen as Bloomsbury's one of their 6 favorite books of 1999. It's been reviewed by probably 20 or 30 newspapers, and I haven't had one bad review. So it's amazing to me that so many editors passed it up, and yet the viewing public has just received it with open arms. The publisher themselves, it's kind of interesting. They publish a lot of academic books, and they print small print runs, and it takes forever. They told me that it would take 10 years to sell out their print run, and the print one was only 3,000 books. They wanted to print 1,000. I said, oh, come on, let's print at least 5. It sounded like a real estate thing, you know. Well, I want at least 5. Well, okay, 2. Well, how about? And finally finally their marketing director said 3,000, and that's my final answer. So I said, well, okay. And she said that it would take 10 years to sell this out. It sold out in 11 weeks flat. That says a lot about the reception. And Jerry Van Meter, the man that's chronicled in the story, he is a modest man. He is the quintessential cowboy. He didn't realize until the readers and all these people reacted to it, he didn't realize what he did. He didn't realize the importance of it. He does now because of the reception.
A quick follow-up, Tony. I'm just so curious. You stay in touch with Jerry?
I talked to him this morning.
Has he gotten any? I mean, locally, it has to be a celebrity now.
Yes, he is.
Does he hear from people based on?
Absolutely. He gets people who ring his doorbell. He's in the phone book in Kalispell, so he gets people who ring his doorbell. They're holding their book and say, "Oh, Mr. Van Meter, I'm so proud to meet you." And of course, he's a widower, and he loves it. He's just having a ball. He is Mr. Cowboy.
And a final question, I promise, Tony. What did from the time he made his ride in '46 to the time he retired, I assume, to Kalispell, Montana? What did he do? Did he cowboy all his life?
No, he didn't cowboy all. He did cowboy for quite a few years, and then came the opportunity to make big money, larger money, and he worked in mining the most of the adult part of his life.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
One thing about Patty that's so wonderful, I know that you both agree that both in her interview and in her book, she has a great way of expressing herself to where you feel like that you really are an integral part of what's happening at the time. Patty, in addition to Jerry Van Meter, there's another extremely important hero, the horse.
Yes.
Without the horse, the story would not be there, too. Could you take a few minutes to identify the horse and give us a few clips, like you would in the movie?
Yes, yes.
A preview of a movie about that 1,500-mile trip and the incredible hazards. I just don't know how you made it. Today, of course, you couldn't even do it because of the urbanization, probably.
You're right.
But tell us about this remarkable horse.
The story is really about Jerry Van Meter, about the horse, and about the land. Because it was the land, although there were individuals who became obstacles, but it's really those elements. And the horse was every bit as important to the story as Jerry. This was a 5-year-old Osage Indian mare. It belonged to Frank Pistol Pete Eaton, who was Jerry's grandfather's best friend and Jerry's mentor. He taught Jerry how to ride, and I mean, these two gentlemen, Rolla Goodnight, Jerry's grandfather, and Frank Pistol Pete Eaton, whose likeness happens to be the mascot for the Oklahoma State University Cowboys, and several other schools, they're the people that turned him into the cowboy he became. And so Frank Eaton said, "Okay, I'll give you the horse. You know, this horse will get you there." And this horse was what you would call a heavy-duty industrial type horse. It was this Osage Indian mare. In my research, I found out they indeed are different than the regular horse. A heart that's 1.5 times larger than a regular horse. Per unit of measure, a significant amount more red blood cells, which means more oxygen to the heart, to the muscles. And therefore, this was a horse that was capable of riding. Think about it. 1,500 miles in 50 days is 30 miles every day without a let-up. I mean, that's unheard of. And I had to prove that to Nebraska Press. They kind of made me jump through hoops at the beginning to prove that that indeed was the case. But the horse was a remarkable part of it, and they had adventures like they ran. They encountered a mountain lion. They got separated in a river, a raging river. They were accosted by 3 desperados, and then the worst, they got caught in a stampede of wild mustangs, but the worst of all was the crossing of the Mojave Desert. That almost did them in. And Jerry said that was the first time it ever occurred to him that he might die.
There is no way this story could have been completed without both a human being and a horse, both with determination, a big heart, and incredible strength.
Exactly.
Also, the horse almost died.
Yes.
Would you share that story briefly with us?
Well,
because it showed again how a recovery and determination finished the trip.
The horse evidently drank from a water tank somewhere between Amarillo, Texas, and Clovis, New Mexico, some contaminated water, and the horse came down with distemper right as they entered Clovis, New Mexico. Now, distemper, for those who don't know, is akin to pneumonia, and the horse was critically ill. And Jerry, just as he came into town, realized it. Unfortunately, right at the time he rode into New Mexico, he came in one of those big, huge storms that rolls across the Llano Estacado, the high plains of New Mexico. So he had to wait out the storm, and then he got it to a vet, and it takes antibiotics. But they had to sit out 2 days in New Mexico for this horse to gain its strength. And then he had to lessen the miles that he would have to make up later. So the horse had incredible strength, and the horse had heart. The horse had heart. Either one of them should have given up. You would see when you read this book that they both should have just given up and said, "Oh, forget it." They didn't. Eventually, Jerry had a chance to cheat. He had a chance to take a ride in a horse trailer and a pickup truck. He wouldn't. They both had heart. Neither one of them would give up.
It's amazing with that kind of illness that a horse would only get 2 days rest, but the problem here for them was they had a time frame of 50 days.
Right. Mm-hmm. And he didn't even know what the bet was. Jerry didn't know what the bet was, but there was no way he was going to lose that bet. He wanted to be able to look his grandfather in the eye.
Well, he was representing all cowboys, the reputation of the state.
Yeah. A lot of men.
Janelle Burke.
I want to talk just a little bit more about the bet. What really was the bet? What was the underlying bet?
We don't know what the bet was.
How much money? We don't know.
We don't know. But
We don't know if it was money.
Right. We don't even know if it was money. It could have been the ranch. That's been postulated too. The Bar R, Rolla Goodnight's ranch. But what prompted the bet is that the movie star was the other side of the bet. Jimmie Wakeley, who was a singing cowboy like Gene Autry and Roy Rogers. He's the one who bet that Jerry could not make it. And what prompted the bet was that Jimmie Wakeley was back there in Oklahoma. He was the main entertainer at the Cherokee Strip celebration. After the celebration was over, Rolla invited him out to the Bar R, and they were talking. And he said that real cowboys are gone now. They've gone the way of cattle drives and at that time in 1946, the big, long 3,000-mile cattle drives were indeed over. You know, they were much shorter then. And he says, and cowboys like you two, Rolla Goodnight and Frank Eaton, they're gone too. Pretty soon you're going to have to just go to the movies and see people like me portray them. Well, Rolla Goodnight was offended by this. He said, well, I've been cowboying for 60 years, and Frank here's been cowboying for 70. You telling me that our whole way of life's been for nothing? And he said to him, hey, I know somebody who's every bit the cowboy that I was. Yeah. And so are you willing to put your money where your mouth is?
At the end, when Jerry finally does arrive at the designated spot, what does he realize about this whole way of life?
Well, he realized, number one, that he truly was the man that he wanted to be. It's a journey from boyhood to manhood. He also, part of that, the comment that Jimmie Wakeley had made was the fact that the world is changing. The farming way of life is going to be over, and all these soldiers that are coming home, they're not going to want to live on the farm. They're going to want to live in the big cities. Jerry found out that part was right. But he found out that, indeed, he could look his granddad in the eye. And he met Jimmie Wakeley, and Jimmie Wakeley told him, you are a cowboy through and through, just like your grandfather said you were.
And that last circle around, would you share with us at the very last circle when they came to the Rose Bowl?
The Rose Bowl is when he realized he'd made it. Jerry was traveling. Route 66, the last 50 miles of Route 66 is along Colorado Boulevard. And that's the route that he took into Hollywood. And so he stumbled onto, he needed to stop and rest, get out of the traffic. And so they stopped in this park. And the park was the setting of the Rose Bowl.
What a way to bring a bridge to the next show. Thank you, Janelle, for building that bridge for us. Ladies and gentlemen, our guest has been Patty Dickinson in her wonderful book, Hollywood, The Hard Way, A Cowboy's Journey. And we were just getting into an exciting part of the story, but the good news is that our guest will be back with us again next week on this program, on this station at the same time, and we'll pick up part 2 and finish the story of Hollywood the Hard Way. Also at that time, we're going to talk with our guest about the movie contract. She just returned yesterday as we were taping this program from Los Angeles or Hollywood, in which she was working on the script with the producers, and I know you'll want to hear about that. So please be with us again next week at the same time, when again we will interview Patty Dickinson with her book. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running entirely college-produced program on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station. Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced by North Idaho College located on Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
We are most pleased to welcome back our guest from last week, author Patty Dickinson. She's the author of a book called Hollywood, The Hard Way, A Cowboy's Journey. This book is set in Guthrie, Oklahoma, where a young cowboy in 1946, based on a bet of his grandfather with a movie star, rode a horse from Guthrie, Oklahoma to Hollywood and did it in 49 days, and the bet was that he must do it within 50 days. Not only has this book, Hollywood the Hard Way, already sold out the first printing, but it's also now being made into a movie. In addition to that, it is also on an audio cassette where you can get it and actually hear the book read. Patty, welcome back to our program. We had you here over 14 months ago, And now we have you back last week and this week, and I want to first again congratulate you on the signing of the movie and the success of the book. It's a delightful story, and you've been generous with our program once before and again in this series. Welcome back to our program.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm enjoying it.
And as always, I'm pleased to have our panelist, Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and next to her is Steve Schenck, who is the Vice President of College Relations and Development at Federal College. And Janelle, we'll let you pick up where we left off last week when we ran out of time, and you had a wonderful story that you were sharing with our author.
It is indeed a wonderful story. It's a story of a cowboy, and it's a story of that cowboy with his horse and their extraordinary adventures as they rode across the Southwest shortly after World War II. Can you tell us maybe one adventure that they had en route, I believe had to do with the horse warning Jerry about not entering a dangerous area that he might otherwise have taken. So that horse was really a savior for him. And then also, would you share with us what happens at the end when they finally get to their destination?
Well, Jerry had been told that Fan, the name of his horse, had a great deal of horse sense. He was just 20 years old. He wasn't quite convinced of it. But he was about to enter what we would call a box canyon. This is in the Superstition Mountains of Arizona. And the horse just stopped. It refused to go into this entrance. And no matter what he did, this horse absolutely would not go. And he reared up, and then what happened, Jerry shouted the horse to go. And whatever it was that loosened the first rock, down came this rain of rocks that totally blocked this entrance. And had he gone, as Jerry was urging her, actually it was a mare, had she gone through that entrance, they would have been critically injured. So he was so humbled by that experience. He knew that indeed she did have horse sense, and she saved his life.
And then at the end of their long journey, a very special thing happened.
Are you referring to the Rose Bowl? That was a magic moment. I think he rode into the empty Rose Bowl. The gate was wide open. He didn't want to miss the opportunity. He'd heard a lot about it. He'd listened to football games on the radio. He rode into the empty Rose Bowl, down onto the track, and he looked up and he said that it reminded him of New Mexico, that these seats went halfway to heaven. And I think probably because he was tired, he'd been without sleep and deprived of water and food. I think he was sort of delirious. He heard the crowd. He heard a crowd. He heard it. He said, I actually heard it. They were cheering, they were cheering for me and for Fan. And it was the moment, he said, that when he realized he'd actually made it, that the journey was truly over.
He had ridden all the way to Hollywood.
He had.
And around the track at the Rose Bowl.
Yes. And the funny part was that, he let loose of the reins for a minute, and Fan reached over and ate Rose Bowl grass. And then they actually both got to go down and be in the end zone at the Rose Bowl. And Jerry said that they could truly say that they both made it to the end zone of the Rose Bowl without playing a game.
Steve Schenck.
Patty, welcome back. I want to maybe go back to some threads of last week's interview that I didn't quite get to tie together and ask some follow-up questions. It occurred to me at the time, and you mentioned, I believe, that the University of Nebraska Press, which eventually published your book, I think 18 other publishers turned it down. University of Nebraska Press said yes. Questioned you pretty strongly about the truth of the tale you told.
Absolutely.
And that made me think just a bit about Jimmie Wakeley, who was the Hollywood Western star who bet the young man's grandfather, Jerry Van Meter's grandfather, on this ride. Did he ever question the truth of the ride?
No, he did not. I guess it's part of the times that, in the first place, Jimmie Wakeley, we're going to talk about that time, that Jimmie Wakeley knew Rolla Goodnight. And he
his
knew,
grandfather.
Right, and he knew Jerry Van Meter. maybe in the context of today, and I think that's true, how Nebraska press questioned it, that you would question the validity of what he did. They didn't then because they knew. They knew the caliber of this family, the caliber of the men. I mean, Jimmie Wakeley was well acquainted. He never, he saw him. I mean, he showed up. So he knew he'd made it. And if one were to look at Jerry Van Meter, which I talked to Jimmie Wakeley's daughter, one would know only by looking at him that he'd done it. I mean, he was half dead when he got there.
I think it says something important that Jimmie Wakeley didn't question the truth of it. It tells you something about the people that were involved. And again, to go back to some of your answers from last week's show, I think that the comment that Jimmie Wakeley made to Jerry Van Meter's grandfather that started the bet was that it's over. There are no cowboys left.
Right.
And maybe secretly, do you think Jimmie Wakeley was hoping he was wrong?
That's a good question. No, yes, I think he did hope that what he bet was wrong, because he really wanted to believe in the fact that there was somebody out there like these two men, like Rolla Goodnight and Frank Eaton. They were very famous. And I think he secretly wanted to believe. And I was darn happy when Jerry showed up.
And when Jerry rode into California and Hollywood 49 days later, he knew he was looking at a real cowboy.
Yeah, he did. And he was happy about that.
Thank you.
May I just add to what Steve, that's an excellent question Steve had concerning verification that the University Press, University of Nebraska had asked for. But something else that's in the book throughout is, as Jerry went across this 1,500-mile trip, there were eyewitnesses.
Oh, yeah.
Like, for example, when the horse almost died and the vet took care of the horse, that's a great documentation that the horse was in bad condition. Or at the end, when people saw both the horse and the man, that it's not one of those things that you don't have a tremendous amount of documentation.
Right. And, half of our cowboy legends are oral history. You have to depend on oral history. And thank goodness there were enough people that I could contact, and what have you, that I was able to prove it. I flooded them with affidavits. Truly, their fax machine just wore out. And, I wasn't going to get that far and then give up on providing them the right proof that he'd done it. I think the proof, though, anybody to meet Jerry Van Meter would know. He's just a sterling gentleman. He's a hero.
Something we just must not let pass again, and it's the movie contract.
Yes.
And this program is airing in late November and early December of the year 2000. The movie won't be out yet.
No.
But would you share several things? Number one is, how did the movie contract come about?
It came about almost in a serendipitous fashion, as I heard about the story in the first place. I was in Albuquerque, New Mexico on the book signing tour in October of last year, and the producer happened to be there filming a television show of which he's producing now, and there was this great big huge story in the Albuquerque Journal about it, and the location, it listed the location of my signing. He went down, he was captured by what the newspaper said. He went down and bought a book and took it back, he said, to his hotel, read it, and then was so enamored of the story that he took his card back and left it there for me to call. Well, that's how it happened. There was a big gap in between, because in the meantime, Creative Artists Agency, one of the largest talent and agencies, Steven Spielberg's agent in Hollywood, had tracked me down in Stillwater, Oklahoma, and signed me while I was actually out on the trail. So there was a big gap in between our meeting, but I called him when I was not happy with the progress I was getting from CAA, Creative Artists Agency, and I said, "Are you still interested?" And he emailed me back within 15 minutes, says, "You've made my day." And that's how we got together.
Now, as we're taping this program, you had arrived back in Coeur d'Alene yesterday, I believe.
Yes.
From Los Angeles.
Yes.
For those people who are budding authors and they may also get to a contract with a movie, what do you go through? I'm sure It's very detailed.
It
and how
is.
much control are you going to have over the movie script?
Well, part of the reason that I picked this, I had 25 different production companies contact me.
How wonderful.
Yeah, about it. But I went with him because his vision of the movie is the same as mine. What he likes about this is to transfer the innocence of the times and the integrity and courage of this young man to the film, feature film.
It's about those three things we talked about last week.
Right.
It's the man, the horse, and the elements.
That's exactly right. And that's the way he sees it. It's going to be all filmed. Well, here's what I found out in Los Angeles. That, one thing I found out is you have a lot of meetings. You meet over lunch is what you do. Long lunches. It's going to be filmed entirely on location, starting in Oklahoma, going all the way to Hollywood.
Including the Rose Bowl.
Right. Oh, yes. And they have 2 crews, and they have all these trailers. And so they pick the film locations, and then they set up trailers. I guess that's what you call them, trailers, at this one shooting location. Everything's set up, and then while they're filming at that location, another crew takes another set of trailers and sets up at the next location, so that when filming is done in the one, the star doesn't waste a day. They travel by car, whatever, and they get to the next location. Everything's set, and away they go filming. They don't lose any time whatsoever. I thought that was interesting.
Now, this would be a wonderful time to announce if it is, has the star been chosen, either the horse or the man?
No, actually, the way I understand it is the producer does not want a star. Number one, you're talking major bucks, and that makes it much harder to get financing. Mm-hmm. But what he doesn't, the main reason he doesn't want a star is because he doesn't want the baggage that's attached to that star. Everybody asks me who's going to, Brad Pitt, whatever. But he said that this is a movie that will be a star maker. Whoever that young man is will come out a star. And I believe that. I really believe in this film. I believe it because what I've heard from people that I've run into.
That makes it so authentic too. If this is not a star at this time, but Jerry was and is a, I'm sure, wonderful person, a cowboy.
Yes.
Living at this time off the land, and so that will make it much more authentic. Is that another purpose, probably, in not using a famous person?
Right, and because they want a real cowboy who can act, and the main thing is a cowboy who loves horses, not just can ride, but who truly will love the horse that they use. And it's easy to find a horse that looks like Fan. In April of 1998, I drove over, and to get some still shots of Jerry, we took him to a paint farm. This is the kind of horse it looks like. And we found one, a 5-year-old mare named Pixie, at this paint farm over there. Dead ringer for Fan. And I got a whole bunch of shots on Jerry, exactly like the shot that was taken by his newspaper the day before he left on the ride. I got that same pose 53 years later, lifetime later. Here he is at 20, here he is at 73.
You've done a lot of work for the movie company too, because
yes.
they can have all that. Will Jerry be involved probably in helping select the horse? Or maybe I'm getting into areas that you haven't covered.
No, actually, I think they'd love to have just a cameo shot of him so people can see what he is today. But no, that's all done by, they're going to hire a horse expert, they told me. It's a rodeo rider. They've already got him picked out, and I can't remember his name, but he's quite a famous fellow. And I mean, he knows horses. He will be in charge of the whole horse section of the movie. They'll have more than one horse. They're going to have 3 or 4, they said. It's fascinating to me. This is a whole new ballgame for me.
And then they'll have to have a rather large group of horses for the stampede that took place on
Absolutely.
So there's a lot of work coming.
You're right.
Patty, that was so nice of you to share that, and we thank you for doing that, Janelle Burke.
That's very interesting, but I'd like to go back to a question that Steve talked a little bit about, the era in which this took place and the trust that people had in each other. Obviously, Jerry couldn't carry all the food and the water and other
Right.
things that he needed along with him. So what did he do on the way? And were people open on the way to share with him, to let him pasture his horse, feed his horse, whatever?
Oh, they were. He carried about 25 pounds of grain. He carried some water. He stopped every 4 or 5 days to buy supplies. He stayed in people's barns. He stayed in people's yards. They offered him water. They offered everything. It was a different time. You know, where are you going and what are you doing? And then when he told him, he was an instant celebrity, like in Springerville, Arizona, where he stopped to get a haircut. And they heard about it. Well, half the town was there to wish him well as he rode out of town. It was a beautiful time. I mean, I got really caught up in it. You know, as you can tell, in the book, I delved into the archives of the newspapers along his route and found out what was making headlines and all that kind of stuff. And it was a different time in social mores and how people are accepting and trusting. I really enjoyed that part of it.
He was traveling, in general, a rather major route, but it was certainly not a freeway.
Well, he kind of traveled along Route 66 from Clinton, Oklahoma to Amarillo, just about a mile or so off that. And then he dropped south, and the rest of the way until that last 50 miles, he wasn't anywhere near. He was really cross-country, out in the middle of nowhere. And you know, the thing of it is part of the route that he took, like across the Llano Estacado, we did in a car, my husband and I, and it doesn't look a whole lot different today than it did then.
How did he keep track of where he was?
He had a compass, just some tiny little compass that probably today a child would get in a box of cereal. I mean, it was that, you know. And of course, he told me that if now I can realize that if just a hair's width on that compass, he could miss a town, which he did, by 15 or 20 miles. But I mean, can you imagine? It was a child's...
Very primitive.
Yes.
Did he use the stars at all?
Yes, he did. He did. He had an innate sense of where he was, too. I mean, the sun, you know, the location of the sun. An incredibly smart young man, I think, for just barely 20.
Steve Sheen.
I've got to go back to this question and make sure I've got this right. Steven Spielberg, you were talking with his company and turned him down, and there was another producer who was interested in doing this movie.
No. I didn't talk to... I'm sorry. This Creative Artists Agency that signed me and are representing me as far as their client for the movie also represents Steven Spielberg.
I misunderstood.
Yes,
I
yes.
apologize.
Oh, no.
But I guess my point is still the same. That in some respects, finding a movie producer was much easier for you than finding a book publisher.
Absolutely. I was getting the very first call. I almost fell out of my chair when I got, this is so-and-so production company. We're interested. Do you still own the film rights? And then they were coming 3 and 4 and 5 a week. I mean, I just found that amazing and thrilling.
Congratulations. Let me talk to you a little bit about the title, Hollywood the Hard Way. Now, in looking back now, it was a little prophetic. I mean, obviously Jerry was writing to Hollywood, California, but you didn't have any sense, I'm sure, at the time that the book you were so desperate to get published would ever be turned into a movie.
Never.
Another quick question about title, and personal opinion, may be totally wrong, but I've always thought that titles, I'd like to believe that bad books don't get published because they have good titles, but good titles are very important to the success of a book. Was this your title?
My husband thought of this title. He likened it to gambling, you know, something about dice, something the hard way. And he said, and we were discussing it with Jerry, and because my husband drove me over in the wintertime to Montana a lot when the bad weather, and we were talking about it, and he said to Jerry that this was getting there about as hard of a way as you could get, and Jerry said, yeah, that was the hard way. And we just all looked at each other and knew that was the title. I was the one who added on A Cowboy's Journey because someone said they didn't like Hollywood the Hard Way. It sounded like a starlet story. Well, you add on a cowboy's journey. It's really self-explanatory.
I think you're absolutely right. A couple other quick questions, Tony, if I may. Do you have any idea whether that will be the title of the movie?
Probably not.
And what role, and I'm not talking about a performing role, But what role will you have in the movie production? Will you be an advisor to the
Absolutely.
to the film?
Absolutely. I am a consultant on the film. That was part of my contract, which CAA, Creative Artists Agency, negotiated with the producer's lawyer. That was quite a deal. Also, so I am a consultant, and also I may be drawn into writing some of the screenplay. And this trailer situation that I mentioned maybe last week or this week, I just said to the producer, I just want to make sure I have my own trailer, and he promised me I would. So I really am, I'm just quite excited about that. Part of the thing that I did was the book takes you on the ride. Then I did an on-the-trail series over the internet, first one ever done, I believe, where I took people along on my book tour. I rode in every day from the trail of my book tour and reported the good, the bad, and the funny, so people would know what it's like to do a book tour. So now I am kind of interested in doing what it's like to make a movie and do that on the internet as well. I have a website that's listed there.
One final related question,
Yes.
if I may, Tony. This is a true story. The book you wrote is a true story. Have you any sense of how true the movie producer is going to be to the story you wrote and the ride that Jerry Van Meter made?
I have a great deal of confidence that he's going to stick to the story. There's some minor little things that he's going to do, but he's assured me that the book and the man's story he won't violate. And that's why he has it and someone else doesn't.
Wonderful. Thank you.
I want us to talk about your website.
Okay.
I always think of my viewers, and we want them to be able to come online and do this. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I have that your website is, of course, www.readthewest.com/pdickinson.htm.
Correct.
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 Standing for Patty Dickinson.htm. I'm going to get it one more time. I can see someone running for a pen. So www.readthewest.com/P, as in Patty, Dickinson.htm.
Well, my website is part of readthewest.com, which is an online magazine, a Western magazine. So viewers can also access it by just www.readthewest.com and then search on there. They have a lot of authors,
Right.
and I'm just one of them.
And so they look under Patty Dickinson,
Right.
and they will get
Yes.
this. And so I'm sure they'd like to.
Well, there's reviews on there. All the reviews are on there, and excerpts from the book. On the Author's Trail series is still on there, where they can still go back and see what the book tour was like.
I have two questions, in no way related. The first one is that's the privilege of doing this program for 29 years. You have a little license to do those things. The University of Nebraska Press, they must be so delighted. What kind of reaction are you getting from them now? They're still printing the book, of course.
Yes, it's actually into its third printing now. It's sold out 2 print runs. They're enthusiastic, of course. The editor, a young man, he's very enthusiastic, as is the director, Daniel Ross. He's really proud of it. The fact that they did something. They took a chance with this. The book is written as a novel, more or less. And most presses, university presses, don't do that. And so they took a chance on me. And as they said, they hit a home run. So they're very proud, and it makes me happy for them.
The other question I have is, Jerry had a legal problem. When he was going, I believe, into California, there's a certain border he couldn't cross. And would you tell quickly the story of how he got in?
After 1,250 miles, he arrives at the Arizona-California border, and this officious border guard won't let him in because there's some interdiction against letting horses into California. After all this time, then he tells the guard tells him, go back where you came from, or you'll lose your horse if you get caught.
And so he went?
Well, he sneaked upriver 15 miles and crossed into California, waded over across the Colorado River, and then he decided that, shall I go forward or shall I go back? If I go forward, I chance losing my horse. If I go back, I'm a failure. If he goes forward and he gets caught, he could very well have lost his horse, but he couldn't quit. He had someplace along that trail he'd written, this is not a journey for quitters. And that's the man that I wrote about.
That is the inner strength he had, and also he had to think about the reputation of cowboys, and also he must worry about his grandfather.
Absolutely, looking his grandfather in the eye when he got back. He wanted, and Frank Eaton, he wanted to be able to look him in the eye. They'd call him boy. They always called him boy. Well, boy this, well, boy that, and it bothered him, and so he didn't want to be called boy anymore.
So what he did with this ride is he became a man, a cowboy. He also supported the reputation of cowboys, and very importantly, in a very personal way, he supported his reputation for his grandfather and his associates and friends.
And to himself, he proved that he could do it. He proved, and that was very important to him. You know, it's a story about heroes, and I found out that that's what people want to hear.
And they really are seeking heroes in these days.
Yes,
and so,
yes.
And you're providing them one.
Yes, in this one.
On behalf of our panel and our staff, Patty Dickinson, we want to thank you so much for 2 weeks you've given us this year as you did last year. Again, in front of our viewers, we want to congratulate you on how well the book's doing, and now that you have the movie, and I know our readers will want to not only look at the book, but I'm sure they'll want to have a view of the movie. I hope you'll have a showing here that's a special showing when it's ready.
I guarantee you we'll have a premiere.
Oh, that is so wonderful, and you're so great and wonderful to be here, and congratulations. We cannot overexpress how pleased we are for you.
Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been interviewing Patty Dickinson on her book, Hollywood, The Hard Way, A Cowboy's Journey, and I know that you have been as inspired as we have by her work, her writings, and the hero of her book. And I'd like to invite you to be with us again next week when we'll turn yet to another issue that we believe is of interest to you. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running entirely college-produced program on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us again at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station.